Welcome, my little slave. Despite knowing that I was here to formally introduce myself for marriage, this was the first thing she said. What? I thought I must have heard wrong and let out a confused voice. The mother-in-law giggled as she looked at me. Oh, weren't you a slave after all? With such a poor-looking face. And David, whom I thought was on my side, betrayed me terribly. Glancing at my face, David burst out laughing. It looks poor, right? I'd love to see what your parents look like. That's right. Well, coming to a wealthy family like ours, I wonder if your parents would faint. The mother-in-law and David continued to look down on me. I couldn't stand being looked down upon even by my parents. While they weren't looking, I secretly sent a message to my father. He replied immediately. I'm on my way there right now. I'm going to get some fresh air outside. I couldn't bear to hear any more insults from David and his family. Don't you run away now. David's vulgar laughter echoed. I left the seat too and waited for my father to arrive. 10 minutes later. I brought my father to meet David and the others. I am the father of the slave. My father spoke calmly, but his eyes were not smiling at all. What? The mother-in-law, who should know my father's face, stiffened her face greatly. I am Kelly Smith. I turned 30 this year. I work as an office worker at a small company called Foster Machinery, and I have lived as inconspicuously as possible. That's why I only wear foundation for my usual makeup. I prefer to wear navy or black clothing. I don't wear contacts, and my glasses are thick and have a high prescription. The reason I go to such lengths is that my father has a high-profile job, and I have been influenced by it since I was young. My father is an actor. He used to be popular, and apparently, he was surrounded by women when he walked down the street. He often appears on TV in supporting roles and is moderately well known. I had a tough time because of my father until middle school. Classmates would ask for my father's autograph, and their parents would say, "Let us meet him." I refused all those requests, and as a result, I was often criticized by others. I was probably thought to be unfairly privileged. I was also harassed by envious classmates. I didn't want to cause any trouble for my beloved father. I hated the thought of being seen as arrogant. After much thought, I made a thorough effort to dress plainly and went to a high school where I knew no one. Fortunately, Smith is a common surname, so I was able to live normally from high school. And perhaps because I look plain, men don't approach me. That allowed me to have a comfortable student life. I loved talking about manga with my female friends, and those were probably the happiest times. I met my fiance David after becoming a working adult. David works for the leasing company that provides copiers to the company I work for. David and I had little direct interaction. David would come regularly to check on the copier, and we would exchange a few words then. Our relationship changed dramatically when the copier broke down one day. That day, I was busy preparing materials for a meeting to be held the next morning. However, the copier stopped working in the middle of this. I was greatly troubled. If this continued, I wouldn't be able to prepare the materials for tomorrow's meeting. So I hurriedly called David. David came quickly and checked the copier. Can you fix it? When I asked David anxiously, he responded with a smile. No worries. I'll take care of it. I fell in love with David's smile in an instant. The rest is history. In the end, the copier wasn't fixed, but David arranged for a replacement. The materials were prepared in time for the meeting. I, who had fallen in love with David, made every effort to appeal to him. I asked for his contact information and called him frequently. Then I confessed to David, and we started dating. David was always very kind even after we started dating. He was always considerate, and I had never seen him angry. I thought that even if he knew my father's real identity, he would still treat me kindly. With that in mind, after dating for 3 months, I bravely proposed to David. He accepted joyfully. I remember being very happy. However, there was one thing that concerned me. It was about my appearance. I had always worn thick glasses. I always dressed plainly, even on dates. It was a long-standing habit. Actually, I looked just like my father. I have distinct facial features. Because of my appearance, I was envied by girls in middle school. Boys also judged me by my looks, and I had some tough times. But with David, I was sure it would be okay. From now on, I thought, I would gradually change my appearance for David's sake. That's what I thought. However, after getting engaged to David, I started to feel some discomfort. Before getting engaged, David seemed like a kind person, but recently he has started making remarks that look down on me. The other day, we went to a bridal fair to decide on a wedding venue because David had suggested it. The place David took me to was a dazzling world. It was a luxurious guest house, perfect for a large-scale wedding with over 100 guests. Seeing that scene, I was perplexed. I don't have many friends from my school days. Plus, I didn't want to stand out, so I had hoped for a small venue with only a ceremony. I really wanted to go home right away. However, David was having fun and I couldn't bring it up. So, I endured and passed the time. After it was over, we stopped at a cafe. David was in a very good mood. That wedding venue we just saw was nice, wasn't it? I would prefer an even flashier ceremony though. While drinking coffee, David spoke. If things continued this way, we would end up choosing that wedding venue. In a panic, I decided to discuss my preference with David. I think a wedding with just the two of us might be nice. I don't like standing out too much. I had thought the kind David would surely compromise. However, the reality was completely different. David looked at me and snickered. Indeed, a plain Jane like Kelly wouldn't suit a wedding like the one we just saw. Is there even a dress that would suit those thick glasses of yours? What? I was bewildered by David's comment. But a wedding is a matter between families, right? My family is wealthy. We need to have a decent wedding to maintain our dignity. I was speechless. The previously kind David had started looking down on me as if he had changed. I was terribly shocked by David's attitude. And to my bewildered self, David made an even worse comment. Kelly should just stay quiet and do as I say. You should be grateful to even get married, being such a plain Jane. Suddenly, David's face turned serious, and he made that comment. I was bewildered by his words. I even felt scared by David's serious expression. Then, the next moment, David smiled and said, I'll decide everything for you. Kelly, you just need to say yes and do as I tell you. Yes. I didn't know how to respond and laughed awkwardly. Maybe getting engaged to David was a mistake. But it's too late to pretend it never happened. I have already reported our engagement to the company and our parents. Moreover, I still liked David even after all that had been done to me. He might return to the kind David I knew before the engagement. That's why, despite being puzzled by David's change, I had no choice but to continue with the engagement. David kept making remarks that troubled me. Each time, my heart was hurt. But I couldn't come to dislike David. Even though I thought about breaking up with him, the kind David I knew kept flashing in my mind. I still loved David. I continued the engagement relationship while being puzzled by David's change. Then one day, something happened that made me even more bewildered. It was the day David and I went to the wedding venue to handle the paperwork. After visiting several wedding venues, David decided on the first luxurious guest house we saw. Eagerly, David said, After all, a grand ceremony suits me. Of course, it's mismatched for Kelly. David laughed heartily, hurting me. And so, for the paperwork, David and I went to that guest house. On the way there, I encountered a person. Isn't that David? Mom? What are you doing here? David was surprised and looked at the woman. Then, David introduced her to me. Kelly, this is my mom. Mom, this is Kelly Smith, my fiance. Remember I told you I was getting married? The mother-in-law smiled and greeted me. I'm David's mother. You seem like a serious young lady. Where do you work? Surely it must be at a major company? It was my first meeting with David's mother. I answered nervously. I work in administration at Foster Machinery. Then, the mother-in-law looked puzzled. Foster Machinery. I haven't heard of it. Then, David joined in our conversation. Foster Machinery is one of my sales destinations. It's a small company with about 30 employees, so it's natural you don't know it, Mom. Upon hearing David's explanation, the mother-in-law frowned. I thought since you were David's fiance, you'd work at a more reputable company. Isn't the salary there rather low? Are you planning to make David suffer? I'm sorry. Indeed, the salary at my current company isn't very high. So all I could do was apologize to the mother-in-law. Then, the mother-in-law sighed heavily and said, Anyway, can you stop relying on David like a child? We come from a distinguished lineage. We don't need a woman from an unknown background. Ah. I responded to the mother-in-law's comment with a bewildered reply, but the mother-in-law continued to heat up. First of all, what about your parents? They work at a decent company, right? The mother-in-law glared at me and interrogated me. Well, my father is. As I tried to answer the mother-in-law's question with confusion, my eyes were drawn to her bag because there was something familiar in it. Seeing me silent, David spoke up. Mom, calm down a bit. We'll go and formally introduce Kelly for marriage soon. I see. I won't be very welcoming though. The mother-in-law looked at me with a displeased face, and it seemed my first impression was the worst for her. The path to marriage seemed too difficult, and I secretly sighed. Then came the day of the formal marriage introduction. Wow. In front of David's family home, I muttered in surprise. The scene before me far exceeded my expectations. Since the mother-in-law had mentioned they were from a distinguished family lineage, I had expected David's home to be wealthy. However, the scene before me was more amazing than I expected. The gate was automatic, and there was an elevator inside. Additionally, there were 10 luxury cars outside. They were all foreign cars, probably a hobby of the father-in-law. David started talking to me. My dad isn't here today because of work. It's just Mom, so just relax as usual. David said this with a smile, but my face tightened even more. The mother-in-law had been harsh to me before. Surely she would make some snide remark today too. Then, David and I entered the living room where the mother-in-law was waiting. Hello. About the other day. I said that to the mother-in-law. Then, the next moment, she said something outrageous. Welcome, my little slave. Even though she should have known I was here for a marriage introduction, this was the first thing she said. What? I thought I must have misheard and let out a confused voice. The mother-in-law chuckled as she looked at me. Oh. Weren't you a slave? You have such a poor-looking face. I just wanted someone I could use for free. A slave. How could she say such a terrible thing? Then the mother-in-law laughed as if she was having fun. David told me. He said it's okay to treat you like a slave. It seems like David just wanted to marry someone who would obey him completely. Sorry for you. David, what do you mean? I asked David, turning pale. It must be a poor joke. I wanted to believe that. And David, whom I thought was on my side, betrayed me terribly. Glancing at my face, David burst out laughing. Poor face, right? I'd love to see what your parents look like. They probably have plain faces too. Maybe we could use them as well, right? David said this and laughed loudly. Indeed, having someone obedient for free is appealing. But coming to a wealthy family like ours, I wonder if your parents would faint. The mother-in-law and David continued to look down on me. Then, the mother-in-law asked with a smirk. By the way, what does your father do? He's not homeless, is he? Such a thing. Then David burst out laughing and replied to the mother-in-law. Mom, that's not a job. It's obvious from Kelly that he doesn't have a stable job. Ah, I'm laughing so much it hurts. David and the mother-in-law continued to look down on my parents. They assumed they had low education and plain looks. Frustrated, I clenched my teeth and listened to their remarks. The mother-in-law and David were too disrespectful. I couldn't stand being looked down upon even by my parents. While they weren't looking, I quietly sent a message to my father. I need you here right now. I sent this message along with a map of David's family home that David had sent me for today's marriage introduction. I knew my father had the day off from work today. He was probably relaxing at home by now. Fortunately, my father replied within a minute. I'm on my way. Relieved by my father's response, I spoke to David and the mother-in-law. I'm feeling unwell, so I'm going to get some fresh air outside. I couldn't bear to hear any more insults from David and his family. I thought I would wait quietly outside until my father arrived. Oh really? Then David, let's relax and continue our coffee. The mother-in-law was pleased to be alone with David. Kelly, don't you dare run away. David's vulgar laughter echoed. I left the room and waited outside for my father's arrival. 10 minutes later. My father, wearing dark sunglasses, appeared. Kelly, what's going on? You were supposed to be introducing your fiance's family today, right? I was surprised when you suddenly called. My father asked me with a puzzled face. Dad. I'm just so frustrated. Seeing my father's face, I felt relieved and started to cry. I tried to hold back, but the tears kept coming. What's wrong, Kelly? Seeing me cry, my father began to panic. I explained everything that had happened to my father. Since getting engaged, David's attitude had changed. I also told him about how the mother-in-law had joined David in looking down on me. I can't forgive them for looking down on you without knowing anything. Even as I explained, my tears didn't stop. My father listened to me in silence. However, it seemed like he was quietly angry. Then I told my father something about the mother-in-law. At that moment, my father smirked. He took off his sunglasses and handed them to me. We're going inside now. I'll make sure they regret hurting Kelly. I made a decision at my father's words. My love for David had cooled. All that was left was a desire for revenge. I've made up my mind too. We'll make David and the others regret this. After doing something, I put on my father's sunglasses. Then, together with my father, I entered David's family home. I stood before David and the others, leading my father. Sorry to keep you waiting. Standing resolute with my father, I, wearing sunglasses, left David speechless. Why are you suddenly wearing sunglasses? He muttered while looking at me. The mother-in-law initially smirked at me, but upon seeing my father next to me, she was stunned. I realized how people can freeze in shock. The mother-in-law must have been planning to say something awful again when I returned. But too bad. I won't let things go her way. Instead, I plan to push her into the abyss. She must already know who my father is. Then my father spoke to the mother-in-law. I am the father of the slave. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not smiling. His handsome face only added to his sternness. What? The mother-in-law, who likely knew my father's face, dramatically stiffened her expression. Why? Why is Mr. John Smith here? No, could this be some kind of prank? While shaking, the mother-in-law spoke. Her cheeks were a bit red. There seemed to be an excited atmosphere around her. And her eyes sparkled like those of a young girl. David, not understanding well, remained dumbfounded. My father did not answer her questions and just stared sternly at David and the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law, making eye contact with my father, blushed. It was unbecoming of a woman her age. I watched the mother-in-law with cold eyes. Then, a bewildered David finally asked. Mr. John Smith? Do you know him, Mom? This person. David probably doesn't know about my father. I think he's quite well known among the mother's generation. But younger people might not know unless they watched dramas. Then the mother-in-law glared sharply at David. David. What an impolite thing to say. This gentleman is Mr. John Smith. A great actor and my first love. What? David seemed incredulous. Then the mother-in-law turned towards my father with a smile and spoke. I'm a huge fan of you. Look, this too. She hurriedly grabbed her bag and showed it to my father. It's a keychain available only to fan club members. I've been a fan of you for 20 years. The mother-in-law began to assert her status as a huge fan of my father. Mom. David was somewhat disgusted by the mother-in-law's sudden change. The mother-in-law continued to talk to my father. She must have been very excited to have her favorite actor in front of her. However, my father's gaze on the mother-in-law was very stern. And after being silent until then, my father finally spoke. I understand that you're a fan of mine. However, you tried to treat my beloved daughter Kelly like a slave, didn't you? What? The mother-in-law's high spirits suddenly turned to dismay. She froze, visibly trembling. Ignoring the mother-in-law, my father continued. And you dared to treat me as a homeless person without even meeting me? That's quite disrespectful. Saying that, my father glared at the mother-in-law. Then she began to panic. No. I didn't know that Miss Kelly's father was Mr. John Smith. I'd be thrilled to have you as a family. Right, David? Yeah. David seemed to be pushed by the mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law tried to justify herself to my father. I was disgusted listening to her. Until my father arrived, the mother-in-law had been looking down on both me and my father. Seeing my father, she changed so quickly. I only felt distrust. If I look closely, Kelly does resemble you, such a wonderful lady. The earlier comments were just because I was jealous of losing my son. If I had known about you, I would have treated you more respectfully. The mother-in-law continued to desperately pretend. My father looked at her with annoyance. Watching their exchange, I thought to myself, I can't keep troubling my father like this. Besides, this is my issue. I should clearly express this to the mother-in-law myself. So I told her. I am breaking off my engagement with David. There will never be any family ties between my father and your family. No. Kelly, it was my fault. You're missing the chance to become family with Mr. John Smith. Please reconsider. The mother-in-law, with a tearful face, tried to persuade me. She had been terrible to me up until now. Even her tearful face couldn't be trusted. I looked at her with cold eyes. However, seeing me silent, the mother-in-law thought she could persuade me. She smiled sweetly at me. You want to marry David, don't you? I won't oppose it anymore, it's okay. I will do anything you say for your sake. The mother-in-law, desperate to become family with my father, clung to me. Her readiness to do anything was the complete opposite of her initial stance. I even despised how quickly the mother-in-law changed her opinions. I muttered softly. No, I don't want to. Excuse me? What did you say? Not sure if she had heard me, the mother-in-law tilted her head. So I shouted louder this time. I absolutely do not want to become family with you. What? The mother-in-law was baffled by my shout. I poured out my feelings to her. As soon as you heard where I work, you made derogatory comments, right? And you spoke terribly about my father. I will never forgive that. I firmly told the mother-in-law. What? Thinking it futile to persuade me further, the mother-in-law looked at my father. Then, smiling, she spoke to him. Kelly says this, but you want your daughter to be happy, right? Our family has a lot of money, and surely she will be happy with us. Certainly, some people might think money equals happiness. However, I am different. Perhaps understanding my feelings, my father countered her words. Kelly values love more than money. Besides, we have money. I make a decent amount from acting. The mother-in-law was at a loss for words. It's understandable. After all, my father is a well-known actor who appears frequently on dramas. He earns a lot and isn't short on money. Coming from a wealthy home, there are no benefits for me to marry just for money. The mother-in-law realized this and fell silent. She probably couldn't think of a good way out. Watching the silent mother-in-law, my father continued. You say you are a fan of mine, but I detest people who disparage my dear daughter. Could you please stop calling yourself a fan? With that, my father glared at the mother-in-law. Then, tears started to roll down the mother-in-law's cheeks. If you hate me, I can't go on living. The mother-in-law said this, breaking down in tears. David, who had been silent until now, started to speak. If you stay quiet, you can say whatever you want, huh? Kelly, you'll regret breaking off our engagement. No one else will bother with a plain Jane like you. David smirked as he spoke. David, stop it. In front of my father, the mother-in-law tried to stop David. But David didn't hold back. I chose a plain Jane like you because I thought you'd obey me. I was planning to cheat with cute girls once we were married. This really pisses me off. David rambled on about things I didn't even ask to hear. Listening to David's words, I thought calmly. There was never any love from David. He just wanted a marriage with a woman who would obey him. My affection for David had long since cooled. As I was thinking about this, David continued his selfish remarks. You. My father gritted his teeth, looking like he was about to grab David. It seemed like a good time for me to fight back. Dad, wait. So I stopped my father. I remained wearing my sunglasses, and I let out a slight smile. What now? David seemed taken aback by my confident smile. Do I still look plain? I swiftly took off the sunglasses I had been wearing. What? David stared at my face, frozen in place. It made sense. With the sunglasses off, I was fully made up. Normally, I only wore foundation. But now, I had done my eyeshadow, mascara, and eyeliner. After meeting my father and crying, I had quickly done my makeup. Just eye makeup, but I think it really changed my appearance. Is that really you, Kelly? David's face turns a bit red. He must be mesmerized by how the makeup enhances my features. Yes, it's definitely me. Until now, I didn't want to stand out, so I intentionally made myself look plain. But I've decided to stop hiding myself. Until now, it was because of my father that I unintentionally stood out. That's why I wanted to remain inconspicuous. However, because of that, both David and the mother-in-law spoke ill of my father. If they're going to badmouth my father, I might as well stand out a bit and be myself. That's what I thought. David, with a flushed face, says, If you had been like this from the start, I would have been nicer to you. I would reconsider everything with you if you looked like this with makeup. Let's cancel the engagement breakup right now. And while you're at it, introduce me to some beautiful actresses through your father. Who would cancel the engagement now? And asking for actresses is too presumptuous. I firmly told David. The engagement is off for good. I don't need you, David. I'll also cancel the wedding venue. What? David is stunned. However, I'm not going to let him off that easily. I press him further. Of course, you'll be responsible for the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. That's only fair, right? The mother-in-law cries out in confusion. Wait a minute. It's too much to ask him to pay the whole amount. David also looks bewildered and is unable to argue. Then, my father chimes in. Why not have David's father pay for it? With all those luxury cars he owns, it should be easy for him. My father says this with a pleasant smile. Here, I play my strongest card. If you're not satisfied, we can take this to court? But remember, my father is a famous actor. If the news gets out about this, he might be attacked by his extreme fans. My father has many fervent fans. A critic who once called my father a poor actor. faced terrible consequences. Harassing phone calls and letters with knives in them, the extent of the harassment was unimaginable. It was even in the news for a while. Remembering that incident, the mother-in-law's face turns pale. She frantically tries to persuade David. David, you should bear the entire cancellation fee. You don't know what might happen. From the look on the mother-in-law's face, it seems David understands the gravity of the situation. Huh? No way. David's face turns desperate, and he collapses to his knees. I don't need David in my life. Dad, let's go home. I ignore David and the mother-in-law, who are slumped down, and leave with my father. My engagement with David is conclusively broken off. And David ends up being responsible for the full amount of the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. In fact, David's father is the CEO of a major corporation, and my father once appeared in commercials for his company. Because of that connection, my father informed David's father about David and the mother-in-law's behavior. Naturally, David's father was furious. He severely reprimanded David and the mother-in-law. Then, he pressured David to take on the full amount of the cancellation fee. As a result, David had to shoulder millions. The fallout affected the mother-in-law as well. This time, she was faced with divorce from David's father. It wasn't just because of how they treated us. Apparently, the mother-in-law was notorious for her lavish spending. She had spent a significant amount following my father, a famous actor. That funding came from David's father's money. David's father had apparently run out of patience with her. Additionally, my father revealed that the mother-in-law had sent him quite risky love letters. I want to divorce and be with Mr. John Smith. My current partner is just a source of money. She had written such content in love letters to my father. David's father was furious about this. Despite the mother-in-law's resistance, they proceeded to divorce through lawyers. The mother-in-law lamented, "This isn't how it was supposed to be," and lived in tears, I heard through the grapevine. She was also forced to leave my father's fan club. Her troublesome stalking behavior was too much to handle. It's hard to imagine happiness visiting the mother-in-law now. She brought it upon herself. Half a year has passed. And then, David was arrested. The reason was his stalking behavior towards me. He couldn't forget me after I took off my sunglasses that day. David started appearing frequently in front of me. Even after I quit my job, he would wait outside my house. He also called often. "Please, agree to get engaged again. I can't manage without you." David pleaded over the phone, crying, but in the end, he was only looking at my face. It was very different before and after I showed my makeup. I don't need a man who judges only by looks. I politely refused and blocked his calls. However, David's behavior only escalated. I consulted the police several times. At times, I felt threatened by him. After much deliberation, I filed a complaint with the police. My father supported this decision. Eventually, David was arrested for forcibly entering my house. And with his arrest, he was apparently fired from his job. Now, all that's left for David is several tens of thousands in debt. It's unlikely that David will be able to lead a decent life from now on. That's the punishment for looking down on people. What goes around, comes around. Since then, I've been working as my father's manager. This job is different from my previous office work, it's more challenging. I manage my father's schedule and accompany him to venues to make greetings. I even handle salary negotiations. Previously, as an office worker, I mostly commuted between home and the office. I rarely spoke to people at work and spent most of my time facing a computer. Now, meeting and talking to people has become a main part of my job, a big change from before. Yet, I find this new role incredibly enjoyable. Being a manager is a glamorous job, but it's more than that. It's a behind-the-scenes job that allows my father to focus on acting. The hours are irregular, and it requires adaptability. More than anything, it's a job that allows me to support my father up close. After causing so much worry in the past, I want to properly repay him. It's a job I've just started. Many challenges will likely arise. But I want to persevere and keep looking forward. I continue to work hard every day by my beloved father's side.